Hello, Evelien and Melissa, my colleagues here at Mobycon. Welcome in the webinar on the gender bias, the exploration of gender bias in the field of cycling. Before we, kick off our conversation and you have a short introduction of who you are, I think it will be good to record a short note on what we think gender bias is, the topic we're talking about, because I think it's a relative new topic in our field of work and it is not talked about very much. So I find it helpful. Gender bias, it is the tendency to prefer one gender over another, and it is a form of unconscious bias oftentimes. And it occurs when certain attitudes and stereotypes are attributed to groups of people. Those are ascribed behaviors that affect how we understand the world and how we engage with others. And oftentimes we do not notice gender bias in our daily lives because, that's the way things are. And I think it is also important to note that the way we understand it, that gender itself is not a variable on its own. It intersects with age and ethnicity, our race, social class, sexual orientation, and more. Mm-hmm. So it is also it can be quite difficult to unravel what it is exactly. But still, I think it's really important to talk about the topic and explore, from our personal experiences, but also from what we see as professionals in our field, or maybe the things we would like to push forward. And so I had a call also, an interview with two professionals in the field who brought up several topics that I will be discussing with you to reflect on. So, Melissa, welcome.
Thanks, Angela.
In the webinar. Can you introduce yourself?
So I'm Melissa Bruntlett. I'm the Communications and Engagement Advisor here at Mobycon, working internationally. But I've also been working in cycling advocacy now for the better part of 10 years, focused on helping to promote what it is about cycling that helps to improve people's freedom, independence, and joy, and the joy that people can experience when they're given those options. So it's been sort of driving my passion for quite a while now.
Okay, thank you. Evelien.
Yeah, so I'm Evelien de Jong, and I work at Mobycon for now just over 5 years as a mobility advisor and as a designer of public space. I don't have a lot of history, or at least I only work at this field for 5 years.
We don't have to mention
no.
How much experience we have.
No. Okay. And I work in the Netherlands as well as abroad, but mostly focused on the Netherlands.
Yeah, and so in the interviews we talked not so much about like personal careers and the position of women in the field, but more about the experience of cycling in the streets and how there may be things that are different for women compared to men. And one of the topics that stood out was the fear of riding in the night, for example, and that is, I guess, combined with generally, the stigma that can be around women in the streets, in public space, and being vulnerable when you are on a bike. Evelien, is that something that sometimes is also entered in the conversation in your projects in the Netherlands or abroad?
We do talk about social safety. So is there enough visibility? Is the lighting good, especially in the outside the urban area? But I don't think it's a main topic. Like it's included with the social safety part, but not especially for women. Yeah, I think like if you look at safety, then physical safety is perceived to be much more important, and then there's we also have social safety. That's also one of the boxes to tick. But if you could actually make it more safe by like having more distance between a bicycle path and a road, and then you would have bushes in between them, but you could have like a wide cycle path and that sort of thing. They would prefer that over a cycle path which is near to the street but can't have the same width. So then social safety is lesser than physical safety. Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, because also the interviews we did in the street in Delft, the only topic that women could mention that was that could be improved was riding in the evening and better lighting and visibility.
Yes, especially during the winter when it's dark, when I have to go to work or when I have to come back from work. I don't really like to bike through the Delftse Hout, where it's like no lights or street lights and it's really dark over there. So then I like take another route, where I feel safer.
Well, in the night I don't bike by myself. Then I use a scooter.
Yeah, it's interesting because having had the perspective of cycling around in Canada versus cycling around in the Netherlands, although Evelien, you're saying you're working on small stretches, it's all part of like most approach in the Netherlands is around a network design that's getting people to all the places they need to go. And while a lot of cities in North America are looking at that, they're often pushing cycle tracks away from the busy streets. So my experience in Vancouver is that all of the network was focused on commuting in the most unobstructed trip possible. So it would be on a street, 2 or 3 blocks over from the main street where the shopping is. Often they're very heavily tree lined, which is beautiful in the summer daytime, but in the evening it's a completely different experience. And a city in Vancouver, it's very similar to here, where in the wintertime, 5 o'clock in the evening, it's pitch black out and it becomes more uncomfortable to cycle along there, especially as you get later and the numbers start to dip. And that's what we heard in the interviews, is there's certain areas that are forested and treed that people would avoid when they're cycling around Delft, for example. So it's not something, I think, like you're saying, it's maybe they're not thinking about it enough, because if it's mainly men, for example, that are doing the designing, there isn't that click like, oh yeah, it's uncomfortable because there's no lighting. If we move it away from the street to make sure there's more of a buffer for physical safety, it's also moving people away from the light and the visibility. And those are important things that as women traveling around, and especially I think of my kids, traveling around, they'd feel uncomfortable in dark spaces and would likely call us to come meet them, for example. Whereas if it's traveling down one of the busier, well-lit streets, then they're less likely to reach out, for example.
Yeah. It's it also links with movement that is happening currently in Edinburgh. I saw that on Twitter. On the 11th of March, they had a ride, and they call it Infra Sisters. So, but you see a lot of women with a lot of lighting on their bikes, and they ride the streets of Edinburgh.
And I think what's forgotten in that conversation, and as I mentioned, is it gets dark early in winter. So we're talking about telling people, like, when we talk about darkness, we think about a woman traveling at 11, 12 o'clock in the evening, late at night, coming home from hanging out with friends. But we're not. We're talking about coming home from work for a lot of people, coming home from school. So, when we're looking at all-weather cycling in terms of allowing for riding in snow or rain, we also need to think about darkness.
Yeah.
But I also think that if you're, especially talking about at night, like if you go out and you park your bike, usually they want you to park your bike where you don't see it, because we think parked bikes are very ugly. But that also means that if you have to get your bike when it's 4 a.m. or something like that, you don't have any, or at least you're in a space where anything could happen if there's someone else who's not that nice. So that's also, I think, something we forget because we want to get rid of all the not so
clutter.
nice
Yeah, you don't
things.
want the park bikes in
Yeah.
very visible in public space,
Yeah.
but then you as a woman, when you've had a nice night out, you
Yeah.
end up in this dark alley.
Yeah, and you've locked your bike pretty well, so
Yeah, you need
unlocking
time.
it, you need time, and then, or at least I used to just look around a bit, like, are there any people who are coming near me who I
Yeah.
don't want to be near
Yeah.
me? Yeah. So that's also, I think, I don't know if you can actually solve it with design, but it's at least something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about where the parking is located, where people are most likely to travel in the evening, even if you don't want to stay right in front of the restaurant, making sure that bike parking is still, is still comfortable to be in.
Yeah.
Could there be other ways that the field of cycling or mobility could start thinking about these systemic problems that we have that are not, it's not just about mobility, it is about being vulnerable in public space. How could, the field of mobility contribute to that?
Yeah, I mean, my first answer is always to have diversity of voices in terms of the engagement, to understand what the problem is, because we work based on our experience. Our lived experience informs what we do, and if you don't know, then it's hard to solve the problem if you don't talk to people who are directly impacted. So I mean, I realize that's something that is increasing more and more. More and more people are doing participatory engagement and planning, but I think that that's a good step forward in terms of creating a more inclusive environment for design.
Yeah, but I also think, like, with participation projects, usually the people who come to them are older white men, because it's in the evening, like around 8 or something, 8 till 10, and like the young women with families don't, or at least they have their children sleeping, so they can't go to the participation. So the interesting thing I thought with the COVID, where we all had to do online participation, was that the number of young women dramatically increased, at least in my projects.
Okay.
So because they could just turn on their screen and then they could be there.
Yeah.
They could say what they wanted to say, and then if they had to leave, they could just leave. While if you're going to a space and you have to be there for a couple of hours, I think you don't get a babysitter to say something about your street unless it's really, really important to you. But
yeah, no, I agree. I think the accessibility of it, of making sure it's at the times that people can attend, or in a medium where people have more flexibility, is one way to definitely help that.
Yeah.
And then you can put yourself on mute if a kid is fighting. Speaking from experience.
Or we sometimes have participation events where it's like from 3 o'clock till 9 or something, which was really tiring for me, at least. So maybe do shifts with us consultants. But then you have the opportunity, everyone can just pop by, say something, and leave whenever they want, while the more traditional nights are more standing, and we have a presentation, and then you can...
The plenary with questions and so having more flexible engagement in terms of time, in terms of format, and in terms of online, offline. That is indeed a good example of a strategic approach that also we as consultants could, advise cities on, or make sure that we include that in our own projects. Yeah, so one other topic I quickly want to bring up, what we talked a bit about in the interview, is the design of bicycles, the design of bike accessories, and how that does or does not fit women of all sizes and ages well. Anything to share on that, maybe also related to the bike parking, I'm not sure, but
I mean, I think it always feels like such a ridiculous thing when I bring it up, but it's such a small thing to improve the comfort of cycling. It's just the saddles that we sit on. I love Ove feet. I think it's fantastic. I hate the saddles. They are not comfortable. And yeah, just like little things like that. We've learned, or some of us have learned through research. I mean, Invisible Women is such a good book to highlight that majority of the things that are designed for us as human beings are designed from the perspective of men and what works for a man. And yeah, there's the Omafeet, which are fantastic for stepping through, but then when the accessories themselves that go with it aren't actually designed for women, then it creates a barrier. I've been cycling since I was very little, so I've adapted and I just put up with it. But I mean, things like handle grips, making sure that they're comfortable, and making sure that the distance, I mean, Evelyn, you and I are not the tallest of women, and making sure that the bike is designed ergonomically to make that comfortable. But I think that's an industry change that needs to happen in terms of just the design of the bicycles themselves. But
Yeah. Yeah,
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think the only thing is like with bike parking, if you have 2 layers of bike parking, it's really challenging. At least in the station in Delft, you have like the pull-out things, and then when they're a bit rough, it's quite difficult to get your bike out, or at least to get the thing out and then put your bike in. And bikes are quite heavy.
yeah.
At least I have like a normal city bike with just 3 gears and everything. Not a fancy thing, but I think they only make like racing bikes and that sort of thing, like really light. Or if you have like a very expensive bike, but my bike is very heavy, so I'm like, yeah, it's not that easy. Or when you have like a fietsschoot, so if you have stairs and you have like
like the gutter for the wheel.
gutter,
yeah.
then you really have to put on the brakes, because otherwise your bike just goes faster than yourself.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and even like thinking about weight, and it's a conversation I've had with people in North America who have like arthritis, for example. Getting a bike up a curb, I mean, understanding that a curb slope makes it easier for someone to get their bike off of the cycle track in the first place, or the road if you're riding on the road.
Yeah.
You know, these are all important things to remember in design. Not just because we're women, but I mean, I don't know, an average child has a hard time lifting up a Dutch bike or any bike.
Yeah.
But yeah,
not. I agree. Not just because we're women or something, but the daily reality is that in the Netherlands, the trips that women take on the bike, they oftentimes bring their children and the groceries.
Yeah.
So if you pile all of that on your bike, it is super. It's super doable.
Yeah.
But indeed, if you have
to
even a
lift
small
it,
curb and you have to pull that up, that can be strenuous.
To impossible, depending on the bicycle and the size of the child.
A kid in the front, maybe 10 kilos, a kid in the back, maybe 15, and then some groceries. So it's, it easily gets, quite heavy to deal with.
Yeah, and I think, you bring up an excellent point with the racks, and just little things like that sometimes, depending on someone's perspective, or mainly from a male perspective, it's like, it's easy, let me show you how it's done. It's like, okay, but I'm different geometry myself. My strength is down in my legs, not in my arms. So, lifting a bike, I always try to find the lower racks when I can.
Yeah, that's a better strategy. So back in the day, in the bike parking of the stations, there was always a sign saying, men have to put their bikes in the upper racks. And then, they didn't mention anything else, but then, others
presumed.
Women or men were not that strong would put it in the lower racks. How would you feel about starting a conversation that was actually, not a bad thing to have those signs? Since the redesign of all these stations, I haven't seen those signs anymore.
It's interesting because I think it does enter into gray area when you're talking about, like you talked about, gender intersectionality. Then do we revert back to a more binary conversation? Do we risk being non-inclusive in that way? yeah, maybe it's just a matter of if you can lift X amount
Yeah.
of kilos, please put your bike on
Yeah.
top.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or just if you can,
Yeah.
because I think it's mostly also a matter of time. So people don't want the hassle of, they're like, well, there's a place
Yeah.
below, why would I put it?
Yeah, they don't even think about the fact that for some, or they're not aware that
Yeah.
for some people it is
It's-
hard
yeah.
to get the bike up there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anyone does it because they're trying to be overly selfish or mean. They're just supposed to make it easy.
Yeah.
Most of us arrive to the train station within seconds of our train.
Yeah.
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 So I don't
I'm
know.
just wondering,
Yeah.
would people get up 5 minutes earlier?
If it
So,
meant
No.
to make it more comfortable for others
Yeah.
to park their bike.
I think human beings are pragmatic creatures and probably would not change their behavior. But yeah, I think it's obviously
But
a
I mean,
challenge.
that does link, to, I guess, a bigger conversation about, okay, is it always necessary to be as quickly as possible and to be in a hurry and, to have this focus on speed and efficiency, or can we somehow sometimes change the conversation to how, can we be more caring for each other? And maybe sometimes, you spend 2 more minutes, but it means the world to somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like the cost-benefit analysis also says that if you get extra, or at least you save time, then it means extra money. So
Yeah.
In
That's
the
also-
cost-benefit
Yeah, in the
analysis that
cost-benefit.
is being done.
Yeah.
so that's also maybe a bit strange.
That is also a strategic,
Yeah.
very strategic need there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is based on historic sort of policies that were more focused on the economic gain versus the caring or the unpaid work, which is where we get from like having unpaid care work and how we facilitate those trips to the economic trips of the commute to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes
Yeah.
we all just need to slow down a little.
Yeah. I think this is a perfect thing to wrap up our conversation with, because this gets into such a big topic of a full webinar series about slowing down
Slowing
and
down.
the benefit if you would do that, and
Yeah.
how that is kind of contra-intuitive to what is happening in the field of traffic and mobility. Yeah. Thank you very much for the conversation.
Thanks, Angela.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.